So we have a very distinguished list of panelists. So Sebastian, Ursh, and Mark, I'll take a minute to introduce everyone briefly, but I want to welcome our participants as well. We have quite a number of registrations, more than 75 on last count. Mostly a lot of professionals, senior professionals from the professional services consulting world. And I hope, that by the end of this webinar, all of us will take away some key insights and lessons from the practitioners that we have on the call today. So thanks again. Very quick introduction to our panelists here. As I said, we have Sebastian, Ursh, and Mark. So Sebastian, he's shaping the technology strategy for KPMG globally, and he has been a thought leader when it comes to leveraging technology for professional services firms. He's been working on digital transformation for consulting firms and publishes very regularly on LinkedIn and other social media, about how this world is shaping. So we look forward to his insights and thoughts on, what does the future hold when it comes to technology for professional services firms.
Thank you, Pratyush. It's great to be here.
Thank you, Sebastian. And our second panelist, Ursh. Ursh is the CEO of Candela Labs. Candela Labs is an insurance technology company. And in his previous roles, Ursh has done a number of things with professional services firms, primarily when it comes to business transformation, digital transformation, truly international career professional, built and scaled up teams within Big Four consulting firms and practices. So we look forward to hearing from Ursh. He's been on both sides, been on the professional services side and now leading a technology company as well. So Ursh, welcome, and we look forward to your insights as well for the participants.
Thank you, Pratyush. Thanks.
Fantastic. And last but not the least, Mark Bullin. Many of you on the call might have heard from Mark or might have known him in his role at Evaluserve. Mark was a partner at McKinsey and is now the chief strategist for Evaluserve. He co-founded Evaluserve about 20 years ago now. So this is our Evaluserve's 20th anniversary, and we look forward to some celebrations, not the same as we would have liked it to be, but hey, nonetheless, we are here 20 years, doing well, going strong, and especially for consulting and professional services firms, our portfolio continues to evolve. Mark, thank you for agreeing to join us today.
Well, thanks. Looking forward.
Fantastic. So welcome again, everyone. The discussion today will focus on 4 key themes. And we'll make sure that we have clean breaks between the 4 themes, but it may not always be possible. So the 4 themes: what are the key components of a scalable insights generation program? Right? I mean, especially for professional services, all of us professionals here in consulting, advisory, legal, it's always a choice sometimes between how much do you leverage technology. And we'll try and understand what are the key components of a scalable insights program. Then there are multiple levers you can use. But if you have a limited budget, which lever gives you the maximum return on investment? So we'll spend some time on that. And the third theme here, artificial intelligence, machine learning. A lot of hype out there. I was referring to an article I read a couple of months ago. It basically said that AI is the biggest job creator in the history, because there's so many people that still claim to use AI, but on the back end, it's still brute force or just labor. So we'll see what does it mean for professional services firms? What are the use cases that are relevant, specifically when it comes to insights for professional services firms? And finally, we'd like to spend some time talking about the user experience and usability of technology, right? It's easy to throw technology at a problem, but we have seen in multiple client contexts, and many professionals on the webinar here will also agree with this, that the adoption of technology and the change management of that is the biggest challenge. So how do you drive user experience to make sure that the technology that you've invested in actually delivers value and is used? So these are the 4 key themes. Just a couple of quick housekeeping points here. So the Q&A will be, throughout the session. If you have any questions, there is a chat window. Please type in your questions, and I'm hopeful that we'll find time to address many of the questions, if not all. And if you're not able to answer your questions here on this webinar, we'll make sure that somehow we are able to get back to you with answers to your questions. And second, quick housekeeping point as well, to enhance your experience, of this webinar, if you can please move to grid view. So on the top right-hand corner, if you can just click on the grid view icon, I think that will ensure that you are able to see all the panelists, and hopefully that'll be a better experience. So with that, I'll like to dive straight in. So thanks again, everyone. So like I said, the first theme, the key components of a scalable insights generation program. So, professional services by its very nature, it's dependent on human intuition, human experience, right? Your domain knowledge, your expertise. And hence, the model has always been too dependent on the time and material economics. But obviously, this pandemic has brought about, the biggest digital acceleration possible for many industries. Professional services is no exception. So my first question, and Sebastian, since you represent a Big Four firm, in your current role as shaping technology for them, what do you think, on how do mind and machine come together to really deliver true impact? And if possible, how do you see the commercial model changing for professional services firms?
Thank you, Pratyush. I think technology is definitely changing professional services, not since a few months or so, but for a couple of years by now. And clearly, I would say all my life that I can look back on in professional services, which is close to 15 years now. And I have to say that I think it is a really good development that is happening, because I think mind and machine can come together very successfully, especially in professional services. And with the technology developments that we have seen over the past couple of years, we have been able to unlock a lot of this concept, or this whole idea of humans and machines working together. So for us, technology is really a key enabler. It drives additional insights. It helps us automate some of our work. So there's definitely a big operational efficiency element to it. And of course, there's a big augmentation aspect to it as well. And I think that's the most exciting one, because this is where we're talking a lot about additional client value that is generated. And in a lot of my articles, I really like to talk about that as well, because I think it is changing the way we interact with our clients in a number of dimensions. We're moving maybe to some extent away from a world where it was about the individual qualifications towards one that is more about delivering holistic solutions. So that's definitely one aspect of technology for us as well. So the term solution is also something that we borrowed a lot from technology providers.
Of course.
But I think it really nicely expresses that it's a lot more about creating this tangible output, tangible outcomes. So something that is not really based very much on the traditional time and material model anymore, but is moving to different business models. Fixed fee and gain share developments have been around for probably more than 20 years by now, and are pretty common practice across consulting. They are moving a lot into legal services now these days as well. But I think it was still a traditional curve, maybe in terms of scalability. Managed services have been on top of this traditional curve. Now we see a new curve enabled through technology and data, one where we find business models creeping into professional services, like smart managed services that are less a labor arbitrage game, but one that is really about quality and speed. It's knowledge as a service, business processes as a service, software as a service. We see all of that happening. So it's really, I think, the not uncommon replacement of older business models by new business models that's starting to affect professional services too. But it's also a lot on the inside. It's not just how we deliver value to clients in these new business models, but it's also a lot about how we operate as a firm. Moving away from time and material into these newer business models and delivering solution requires us to extensively change our value chain, and that is happening all over the place. There's a lot more that's happening upstream, like innovation work, product management work, development, design, and we have a huge and growing operating tail to our business as well, because that needs to keep running. It's not just about delivering a couple of slides and be done with it, but it's actually about running solutions for our clients as well. So it's changing the entire economic model for us. Internal use cases, and I think these are some that are starting to get a bit more common. There's a lot happening, I think, around business development, even in smaller professional service firms that are starting it. Even if they're not fully, let's say, on a new business model, they're starting to see the value of technology in their operations, in the way they build and maintain client relationships. So all of that is dramatically changing how we bring that together. But it's very much about humans and machines coming together. So Mark's book title there is really fitting that theme extremely well, I think. Pratish, you're on mute.
Very relevant insights there.
It's so great. It's the phrase of the year, right?
So thanks, Sebastian. Very relevant insights. So Harsh, you've been on both sides, right? How do you see this space evolving, and specifically the use? In your current role as the CEO, you have a holistic picture. How you run an enterprise, and you've had very productive stints at the Big Fours as well. So how do you see this space evolving? And if you could go back to your transformation stint at a Big Four, for example, would you do things differently now?
So I think we're just about scratching the surface when it comes to leveraging technology and the true power of technology. I mean, technology has been around for the last 20, 30, 40 years, and we've all spoken about it. I think the question you ask is, how do you make these programs truly scalable, right? And what gets in the way? So if I may, I'm going to come at it from both perspectives. What will it take for a program of this nature to truly succeed within a professional services firm, right? And I worked as a sort of group strategy head at one, as a partner at another, and now sort of not on the dark side, if you will, leading actual product development to help firms. So I'll try and give you sort of a balanced view of that, Pratish. I think the first bit when it comes to technology is it should not be a technology-led program, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where programs can become sort of not scalable. It has to be a business-led program. It has to be led by the senior leadership in the business. And where they've got to come from is how will these insights that we're talking about, how will this technology program, how will automation, how will it be used? How will it impact my customers? How will it impact my people? And therefore, what does it mean to revenues, the revenue models? What does it mean to margins? And finally, what does it mean to the operating model of the firm? Right. I think it's that business case with both the upsides and the potential downsides. Now, I think a lot of people will make business cases to justify the ownership or the deployment of a certain technology. And that's not what I'm talking about. And I think, again, those lead to non-scalable business cases, because you will then adopt the technology and that's where the program stops. But if you looked at it as the journey of a firm and said, what will our customers, their customers look like 5 years down the road? Therefore, what will our business look like 5 years down the road? And therefore, what technology journey are we on? What processes are we automating? What does that mean for my people? What does that mean in terms of the actual model? And we'll come to examples. Start small is what I'd suggest. Simple things like travel and expenses, really a low-hanging fruit. Every organization can automate it. No manager should have to approve travel and expenses. right? And think of tens of thousands of people and the time saving. Think of GDPR compliance. Think of business development, and Sebastian spoke about business development. Why should anyone have to start preparing a proposal from scratch ever? Right? And therefore you get into the world of knowledge management. And therefore now you start to sort of get in on a journey where you're saying, here's how I can offer things to my customers, right? Where my customer sees the true impact of the differentiated value that I bring here. And this is technology enabled, and we'll talk a lot more about sort of what it means in terms of actual use cases. So once the business case is done, my learning is that the business case also needs to factor in the risk side of things. What if we don't adapt? What if we were not to adapt and adopt this technology? What if we were not to make that change? What would happen to us? If you look at the world, just the world that Sebastian and I sort of, Sebastian comes from, and I worked in terms of professional services, who's going to be your next competitor? Where are the competitors coming from, right? There used to be strat firms. There used to be firms that helped with transformation. There used to be sort of the BPO firms, right? And all of the business process outsourcing. And today, if you look at the world of business process outsourcing, I think there are many an entrepreneur trying to build a digital BPO firm, an AI-driven BPO firm. What does that mean, right? And many entrepreneurs have found that it's a lot more difficult to take a large established firm and change that than to set up something from start. Right. So all of those bits. I just leave you with two more thoughts on this topic. I think early involvement and input from across the board users, including your customers, is really important. You could start with internal core processes, then go to the revenue side. You could the other way around, start small, outline the journey for the next 5 years, but make sure you take your people along on that journey. You'd be surprised how many naysayers there might be in an organization. This is a change management program. This is not, again, if it's led by technology and by the CIO and the CDO, it's likely to trip. And just the one last bit, choose a technology that's easy to deploy, that's easy to adopt, that's easy to use, and then easy to scale. So don't do the POC on the tech itself. Do the POC on the business case for the business. And so those are my sort of 4 bits. Start with the business, get a very clear business case out there, therefore, and think 5-7 years ahead. Involve stakeholders, and then finally sort of choose the right tech and the right partner. And then the program is scalable. One bit I would say on this, one's got to dream much bigger. One's got to sort of set out a vision for what the firm will look like, right? And then take people on the journey.
No, absolutely. Thanks, Harsh, for those inputs. And clearly, the more I read about this topic, as a very curious student of this subject, buying from the top and such initiatives being driven from the top, I think that really comes out. And not committing to a technology, but solving it as a business problem. I think those two very important insights. So thanks, Harsh. So Mark, over to you. When you were approached by Wiley to write this book, and I know there's a lot going on, across Evaliserve, and we've been also a traditional professional services firm, time and material, linear FTE growth. So, what were you thinking? And did you think 5-10 years down the line? And how do you think now things will evolve? Right, with all the talk of AI and ML, some of it hype still, I must say, but how do you see this space evolving, and what role do humans play? Sebastian, I remember he's talked about this human layer, even if you have the most sophisticated technology. Our business really depends on that human interaction, that relationship, that last mile connection. How do you see all of this evolving for professional services firms?
Yeah, thanks. I would like to start with the clients first. How do they change, right? And while I've written this book, Mine Machine, some time back, it's already a bit outdated. I think there's a need for an overhaul, call it 2.0, something like that. What we're seeing on the client side, and I think that is where I would like to focus initially, is more a need for end-to-end plug-and-play solutions that help them implement a process on a permanent basis as opposed to one-offs, right? Only. with process breaks. What we're hearing from clients is they have so much complexity, they have so many platforms, they have so many processes that for them handling technology solutions that are not end-to-end, that are not simple to implement, say plug and play, is just too complex. And just to give you an idea, right, even if you sell technology, then sometimes you would sort of go down the path of selling some services and then some licensing of some technology attached. Now, this leads to two different procurement processes in many clients, one for the IT procurement, the other one for the business side of things, and then it gets complex and then things die. So simplicity is key. And it's a bit, I would like to compare it a little bit to the iPhone. You know, nobody could tell you how the iPhone should look like before it was actually there. And then once it was there, everybody said, oh, wow. And I think here we have a bit of an issue in the professional services space, because when I look at the core processes, not the experiments, but the core processes of several professional services firms, and over the summer I've looked at a big variety of professional services firms, they're still kind of a little bit stuck in the, call it the PowerPoint mode, the time and material mode, and nonlinear growth is actually something that hasn't really taken off in professional services. So now what does this mean? Currently, let's say if you introduce technology and you become more productive, the client will say, oh, this is fantastic. Now you don't need 10 people anymore, you need 5 only. But we're not going to pay you for that. I mean, it's great, we're going to pay you for 5, but you know, you haven't captured the value of that technology. So how can that change? And I think this is also where we need to understand that moving to the more modern models like subscription for services is a way to capture that value. You know, people like Microsoft or Adobe systems have moved largely to subscription models, and in professional services, this hasn't really happened. The second thing I would like to focus on is sort of the end-to-end productivity. What we're seeing is that specifically in our case, but also in lots of other professional services firms, costs are going up of the FTEs, of the people. However, the processes in the workbench are still kind of quite manual in nature, even though some progress has been made. But I think the main point is that one needs an end-to-end value chain or an end-to-end supply chain to really get that productivity up. What we're seeing is that we are now building several stages, for example, in data acquisition, data extraction, data treatment, analytics, visualization, and ultimately delivery. If there are process breaks in between, you know, you're bound to be unproductive again, because you need to copy and paste from some Excel sheet into something else, and then you have a process break, somebody needs to take it into their hands and so on. So having smooth value chains there is important. Now, then that brings an interesting question of partnerships, you know, like the best AI engine for a specific part of a specific technology or industry vertical, you know, is about working with APIs, working with an external party that can be simply integrated. So I think the models of creating these supply chain for end-to-end solutions will have to change. So that's I think what we're working on, because only if we have end-to-end, we're going to be really productive. And if it can then be sold as a subscription, wow, that's fantastic. Then we can actually capture some of the value. The final thing I would like to talk about, which you know, Sebastian, you've alluded to, and also Arsh, you know, is about how to interact with clients. Ultimately, how are they going to use the product, right? And here we see that working with the personas, the different persona inside companies is very important, and the UX, the user experience, the user interface needs to cater to that. We've done a lot of academic research on this topic, and you know, becoming more decision-oriented, more trigger-based, more usable, as opposed to I give you a PowerPoint, I give you an email, I give you an Excel sheet. That needs to change a lot. So building the solutions, the knowledge solutions into the client's decision-making process in a smooth way is a key. And sometimes, you know, it is better to send a WhatsApp message with a number, with a single number, than to have a 50-page PowerPoint document. But figuring that out, the UX, the UI, how do people work with it? I think this will be a big question going forward for professional services firms, because we are hearing a lot where our clients sort of complain about being left alone to implement something. And then in the end, it doesn't really work. So these are just a couple of thoughts, obviously in a much wider sort of framework of topics for professional services, but just a few here to start with. Pratyush, you're in mute.
I did say, so I said, thanks, Mark, relevant insight. I just did say at the beginning that we'll keep these 4 topics siloed, but the very nature of these topics is that, it's tough to keep them siloed. There will be some spillover. So you've touched upon, and Arsh did talk about adoption as well and buying from the top. So, that's absolutely okay in the spirit of this open conversation we're having. But, a nice segue into a question that a participant has just sent, and I think it's better to address it right away than keep it for towards the end. And maybe, Sebastian, you're best suited to answer this, and then maybe we go around the table. So the question is centers of excellence for digital transformation for professional services, Sebastian. I've seen both sides. We have worked for a firm where they did actually have a digital center of excellence led by a partner, and then there have been others where all practices, they do it their own way. I don't know what is the right approach. Is there a right approach? But how should firms be thinking about, and especially when it also comes to, knowledge management? Arsh talked about proposal generation. In many, we have ourselves run, many workshops over the last few years where we have tried to look at this proposal process, headshots, thumbnails, tombstones. Sorry, a lot of it still, it resides on people's desktops and their hard drives. So what do you think about a center of excellence that can almost drive this from the top? Sebastian, maybe we'll start with you and then go around the table.
Yeah, happy to take that question. So I think centers of excellence can be, of course, a great organizational construct if used the right way. I think to say that there is a center of excellence for the digital transformation of a firm is a dangerous approach. And I think the short-lived fate of many CDOs in other industries reflects that very nicely. I think digital is happening across all functions of a firm, and that also goes for a professional service firm these days. So it's not like you have digital only changing the way we do business development or we manage knowledge. It is very much embedded in the way we work with clients. When we talked about new business models, some of these business models mean that our interaction with clients is very digital. So we need to think about that all the way from sales into delivery, into support, into maybe closing an engagement or maintaining it as a service. So centers of excellence, I think, can be very valuable when it comes to bringing certain capabilities together that are required to make that a reality for the firm. And many firms struggle with having enough capabilities, say, around artificial intelligence or just broader data and analytics, let's say. And there's also an approach that we adopted for ourselves, for example, to say, okay, so irrespective of where we need these capabilities, we need to have centers of excellence for these capabilities, so that we can actually develop them in a cohesive way. And that's, I think, also important to attract the talent that is needed, for firms to have these capabilities. I think, someone who really wants to solve the next generation problem that artificial intelligence can tackle is only happy in an environment where they can actually do that and not be confined to, let's say, solving one case and then, just living with that for the next couple of years, even if some improvement work can be done. So I think this is where centers of excellence come in. I think what's a very interesting development these days with this organizational construct is that it is not just about connecting people within the firm, but it's also increasingly about ecosystems. So for us, for example, our Sensory Advantage ecosystem, which is a group that is led by my colleague Steve Hill in the US, is very much about uncovering relevant insights for our clients and for ourselves from a network of humans and machines, minds and machines across our highly networked firm, but also across our clients, our technology alliance partners, our vendors. So they are also part of this ecosystem because it's absolutely critical to tap into that. And so centers of excellence in that sense can very easily include these groups as well. I think it's so they can be a very helpful construct, especially in those topics that we're discussing here.
No, that's fantastic input, and especially this idea of the ecosystem, a center of excellence, not necessarily just being an internal organizational construct, but something much wider than that. So, Arsh, while you take this question, I'd also like to maybe gently segue into our next topic. So we've, of course, we've seen how cloud has really unlocked some significant potential for professional services firms. Now, I've worked with clients where initially there used to be significant concerns about, storing data, and, for all the right reasons, it's end client data for many consulting firms on the private cloud. And we've heard, then a shift to private cloud and things like that, private cloud versus public cloud. But if you just leave the infrastructure aspects of technology aside, we look at the technology levers, primarily when it comes to insight generation, knowledge management, 4 key levers, right? One is workflows. You talked about proposals. We have looked at similar, pitch and proposal workflow, business development support workflow, thought leadership generation workflow. And in many professional services organizations, it's still broken. It's still, who knows who, and a partner making a call to someone that he or she has worked with in the past. So that is one in our experience. That's one big technology lever. How do you fix the workflows? Then analytics engines, right? Talk of competitive intelligence, or talk of sector analysis, sector intelligence, market insights. Is there a way to really automate a significant part of this? Data collection and research, in some firms is still a largely manual process. So you can automate maybe parts of that. There's so much talk of RPA. We ourselves now, for example, work very closely with a couple of RPA providers. And there are, you talked about digital BPO, Arsh. So obviously, the rules-based routine tasks can relatively easily be automated. I must confess that, many of these RPA players have still struggled to really up their game on the cognitive RPA bit, right? Where really our use cases, the professional services use cases, can be addressed equally well. And finally, we've already spent some time on UX UI, so, but I'll still count that as a lever. So from your perspective, Arsh, is there a particular lever that you think now, when you put your transformation hat on, is there a particular lever that works better and should be the focus for professional services firms? So again, just to reiterate the 4 levers, workflow engines, analytical engines, RPA/productivity engines, and UX and UI. Sure.
So I think the answer lies in the fact that you don't look at these as separate sort of entities, if they interact with each other. Right? It's again back to that sort of the point made earlier. Mark talked about end-to-end, right? And therefore, if you were to look at intelligent workflows, right, and let's get into a little bit more detail there. Intelligent workflows that go starts to end on a process. Right. If this were an insurance firm, and we can take examples of professional services firms, from the time an agent goes and tries to sell to a customer, all the way to the time the underwriting process is completed and the final policy issued to the customer. It can be on a workflow. It can be end to end. Parts of that workflow could use RPA. Right. So therefore, RPA isn't a separate sub-segment, if you will. It isn't something that's distinct. It's part of this workflow. Now, I use the word intelligent workflow because as you manage tens of thousands of cases. Now, we talked about the process where an agent is selling. This could have been the processing of a claim, which many of the BPO firms actually help insurers do. Again, the end-to-end claims process could be automated, not just one simple task of picking up from a spreadsheet and putting it in another system. Take that end-to-end piece, manage tens of thousands of cases. You've now generated enough data to know what works and what doesn't work, right? Where do we get fraud when it comes to claims? What kinds of frauds? How can I avoid fraud? And we'll get to this, I guess, in more detail during the discussion today. But that also leads you to another critical problem. When we're talking about workflows, RPA, and we talked about how the two are integrated, the workflows that work really well will generate the data, and these firms generate enough data to take away the need for training data, and therefore you can move from simple rules-based things to a proper AI engine. And you see how this is a journey. At the end of the day, what I'd like to leave our audience with is the fact that make it integral to the life, the personae that are going to use this technology. It's the underwriters. It's in a consulting firm. It's the consultants. It's the life of a consultant. Where does it start? And at the end of the day, the consultant exists to serve the customer. And along that route, right from the time he or she sort of gets into a business development phase to the time that the program starts and has to be program managed, to the weekly, whether it's timesheets, whether it's research, whether it's knowledge management, to the final preparation of the report. If this were one integrated process, you do multiple things. You'd create significant productivity. You'd take away the mundane tasks out of the individual. You'd get teams across different locations, different countries, different time zones to work together far more collaboratively. You would be using tools and working with the ecosystem to make that end outcome far more productive. And therefore, then you would start to think about the revenue models in terms of how do I make this, back to Mark's point, how do you make this a subscription-based type thing? How do you leverage the value that's now got generated? So again, my point here is these aren't separate, distinct pieces. These are all steps on a journey, and I think that's how we should look at it. Yeah. Ultimately, what you've got to do is then start to measure the outcomes. Again, in the case of claims, as an example, how much is hands-free? How much is the straight-through processing that we can drive? Is it 20%, 30%, 40% of the cases, and we'd be on a journey? But for the rest, are those knowledge workers truly being enabled with the knowledge, and what productivity gains are we getting? And that X times productivity gains that we get can be measured. And whether now the individual is doing an internal focused task or a customer focused task, here you have then customer engagement up, productivity up, straight through processing, i.e. machine AI, ML, automated workflows based elements on the up, and you can see a game-changing to the firm then. We're not just talking about, we're talking about then the step leap in terms of revenues, again, that Sebastian started.
Fantastic. So you've talked about, focusing on the entire user experience and the user journey and not breaking them down necessarily by, the four levers that I've talked about. Mark, you've, in the last couple of months, spent a lot of time talking to our clients. And of course, you have a big network within the professional services community. What are you hearing? Of course, UX and UI, looks like that's been a big focus of your research recently. But if you look at these four levers, are these really distinct levers? Should they be looked at, in an integrated way, or do you have a different point of view on this? Mark, you are again on mute.
Yeah, I would like to continue where Ursh just left it. I think I completely agree with this outcomes-based sort of view of things. Ultimately, if a client or a persona doesn't like what they're getting, they're just going to circumvent the workflow. Okay, so therefore, it must be better than what they have today. And so what is this outcome, right? And what we see from our clients are essentially four key parameters that they want to see. One is certainly productivity, but that's good old productivity, and that by itself doesn't cut it. I'll come to that just in a second. Second, quality, and obviously time to market, right? How quickly can they do things? How timely is it? And then quality, for example, backward audit trails. We are seeing, for example, just take one use case, which is financial spreading. We have a spreading platform that allows a bank to process loans or loan covenant tracking, and therefore we need to spread a lot of documents that come in, and that gets then translated into numbers. But then at some point, the question will come, well, is that number correct and where does it come from? So you need a backward audit trail, right? Things like that are becoming ever more important, especially in the age of witch hunt, where you actually, whose fault was it, right? Whose fault was it? So you have to go back and prove whose fault was it. And then, and I think one important, but that's still the good old cost, time, quality triangle. But I think there's a new thing coming in, which our clients tell us is increasingly important, is new capabilities. What can I do with this workflow or with this platform, which I couldn't do before? Okay, so everything needs to have some new capabilities that are now possible, that were not possible before, because that will give the client a competitive edge in the marketplace. Just being faster, better, and a little, and a little more productive doesn't cut it yet, right? So I would put that as sort of a key topic for this whole discussion, because these workflows, they give you lots of opportunity to actually add new capabilities. The second point I would like to make is the one about lifecycle. Whatever workflow you choose, whatever RPA engine you use, whatever combination of everything you use, there is a life cycle to that use case, which needs to be updated. And Urs, you mentioned it, right? You start collecting data, which enables you to train your engines better, which means suddenly you may have new capabilities that you didn't have before. And the product management of all these use cases is a key component, because you accompany this this use case over its lifetime, and you may actually want to kill it as well, because it starts sucking up too much resource and you want to kill it. So killing use cases is as important as actually creating new ones and then manage them through the life cycle. There are many more topics to that, but maybe I'll leave it at that and hand back to Sebastian. I'm sure you have some comments there as well.
Thank you, Mark. I really like that last point that you raised. I think what you just mentioned, this discussion here is taking place in the context of professional services. And the point you made about a life cycle of product management is one that isn't traditionally ingrained in professional services, right? It's very much, this whole concept of, let's say, a partner and the pyramid you have underneath in terms of people that smart people that you need to keep busy, is not exactly about creating a certain use case, a certain product that is used across multiple clients, requires maybe even upfront investment, has an operating cost to it as well that needs to be actually spread across many. And getting to this diligence of actually managing products to the life cycle requires a fundamental adjustment in the way firms are managed. And I think a lot of firms are still trying to figure out how that works. So while these levers that you mentioned, Pratyush, are all relevant and very much intertwined, I fully agree with Arjun on that, they quickly end up turning into organizational questions, how to make best use of them. And I think this is where we find the biggest hurdles to adoption in firms. So last year we found out that through our annual KPMG CIO survey that we run for many years now across multiple industries, but we also have professional services as a sub-segment in there with almost 900 firms participating, and we found that only about 4% of them say they have large-scale AI implementation, which is really telling. It shows you how difficult it is to get to scale. And like you said, Mark, I think there are some underlying organizational shortcomings in many of these cases. You find a large share of, let's say, active pilot deployments. Now that's almost half of the firms have some form of AI running on some use case. But to actually get to large-scale deployments, that requires a fundamental shift in how firms are managed. And we're seeing that transitioning happening now, I think.
And I'm also just curious, Sebastian, Urs, and Mark, if there is any evolving line of thinking on how to measure the ROI of technology investments, right? Because I'm sure, Sebastian, to your point, right, why only 4% of the CEOs say they have any scalable AI program going on? Is technology going to become the next marketing or ERP, right? Where you've done it because everyone is doing it, but you don't really know if it will deliver impact. So any evolving thoughts? I know no one has the right answer here, but is there a way for participants in this webinar to think of technology investments and how they can, to their higher ups, how they can show that it is delivering impact?
Maybe I can give an example of a use case, and this sort of starts the discussion going. An audit example. I mean, think of the world of audit, and Mark spoke about partners in hierarchy, right? I know of a firm that does audit of, and all big fours will do that, but one of the firms that does audit of mutual funds. And as you know, in mutual funds, every morning there's a price that's given out, right? What is the firm doing? It's doing a complete audit. What is it able to do? Take all of the data layer to a separate team, and then can use an engine that, because you know for each mutual fund, what are the underlying stocks and how they've moved. And you can compare that to the price movement of that mutual fund, right? And if you can do that price movement correlation, which is a fairly straightforward business case, if there is a negative correlation, prices of stocks went in one direction, but the mutual fund price went in a different direction, you know something went wrong that day. And that links back to the point that Mark made, that you can audit it, you can understand where that fault happened, you can give a lot more confidence as an audit firm, as someone who's looking at that to the end customer, and that end customer to their customers. So if you look at that value chain, you can almost take care of all key stakeholders in that value chain, whilst creating value. So therefore, AI doesn't exist for the sake of AI. Whether I have 4% AI or whether I have 40% AI ultimately gets translated into what ROI do I see from that AI? Do I get, as an example, a differentiation in my offering, and therefore I'm going to win in this world and may win more than what my competitors are going to do? Am I going to offer higher quality of service to my customers, and therefore my customers will either stay longer with me, there's great attraction, or all of those good bits? Is it going to make it easier for my staff to be able to manage some of these things where there's a step change in productivity? We're not talking about 5%, 2%, 3% here, but there's a step change, and they can go back home knowing fully well that their time spent in this professional services firm is very different from how they would have done it in another firm. And attracting talent today, I'd say that attraction of talent is absolute game changer. It's a make or break in many professional services firms. So just some of the aspects based on just one example. Now we can take many more.
No, thank you. Thanks. Sebastian, your thoughts on ROI?
Yeah, I mean, ROI requires that you are able to measure both return and investment. And I think just as we talked about professional service firms going through a major transformation in their business and operating models, it also means they're going through a simultaneous transformation of their management reporting. A lot of firms that I find out there are still reporting based on the good old KPIs. So they still look at net sales per partner, revenue per employee, utilization, engagement profitability, which is all great, but it doesn't go away immediately, but it needs to be complemented by perspectives that are largely unknown in many of these firms. So Mark brought up the point of proper lifecycle product management, so that also includes that as a reporting view. If you actually go to a law firm and ask them how profitable a certain legal matter is across all of their clients, a lot of them will struggle to give you an answer. And things get even more hairy when you ask them, okay, so how much of that work does involve which of your ecosystem partners? So where are you delivering with them? And then when you look at the technology component to their costs, very often you find that it's not really managed. And that can be actually a disastrous shortcoming if you think about it. The technology spend, Gartner predicts, is growing for professional service firms between 5 and 15% annually. And it's going to stay that way for the foreseeable future, at least. And while at the same time, we look at commoditization in certain parts of the service portfolio of these firms. So if you treat technology as a cost component, is that we are talking about a race to the bottom. you need to treat it as a revenue driver. If you want to treat it as a revenue driver, it means you need to understand how it creates value. So you need to translate technology costs that show up somewhere in your general ledger. You need to translate that into, okay, so how does it roll up into your technology capabilities? How is that translated then into infrastructure and applications, and ultimately business services, client-facing solutions? So you need to actually be able to go all the way up through this technology business management model is what we're talking about here. And then you can also talk about an ROI from your technology investments, because that will tell you how much technology is being consumed holistically across different engagements, different clients, for all your individual solutions. And I think that is still a challenge that other industries didn't have, because technology was always a value-adding part to their final product, so they always had a different form of calculating that. And in professional service firms, that is only just emerging. So many firms are still in that transformation phase, and the management reporting is a crucial cornerstone of that, I think.
No, absolutely. Thanks, Sebastian. Very relevant point there on reporting and how reporting needs to change to integrate this whole aspect of investment in technology. So I know we talked about 4 themes. I think we've broadly addressed the AI, ML, and Sebastian, thank you for that insight you shared with us on what your survey found about adoption of AI for consulting firms. And of course, we've spent some time on the usability, user experience, and the not one more technology syndrome. So I think we've touched broadly on all the key themes here. There was a question. There's a very important question here from a participant that I want to address, and maybe Mark, I'll hand it over to you. The question is, you talked about the product life cycle as being a very fuzzy concept for professional services firm. That's a skill that they have not really, and Sebastian, you alluded to it as well, they have not really invested in that skill. So how do they really build this capability, build this muscle now? I mean, sorry, can you hear me? I heard it.
Yes, thank you. So the first here is echo as well. I get a Can you hear me well?
Yes, the last sentence was okay. Go ahead.
Okay, now it's gone, yeah. Okay, so organizing for all of this, right? How do you do that? Clearly, product management doesn't exist yet in professional services, or I mean, maybe in some areas, but it usually doesn't make you partner. Let's put it this way, right? It's not on the royal track to partnership, and whatever isn't on the royal track to partnership usually isn't quite a hot area, right? And so, suffers from certain problems, obviously. So I guess, especially sort of the partner-based or the partnership-based models of professional services firms, and there are others, right? I get that. But the partnership ones, they need to rethink their whole setups. Now certain have gone to the point of actually offering partnership roles for technology roles as well. And I think that's going in the right direction. Clearly, such use cases that are of permanent nature, that are of productized nature, they will require some more management, both in terms of the product as such, but also how it's marketed. I feel, for example, that lots of the professional services firms that are partner-based have still a very sort of strong resistance to a product center going to the client directly, bypassing the senior partner on that account. And just the going to market is something that will also have to change, because how do you scale if everything has to go through a senior partner who can maybe get 5 minutes from, if you're lucky, for a normal team on an engagement, right? I mean, we all know how these guys are super, super busy. And so therefore, how do you do that? And I think there needs to be some rethinking. Then, of course, there's the skill point as such, hiring from, for example, from product companies hiring from sort of these skill sets. But then again, you need to make them happy. We have seen, in a prior sort of in a professional service firm, I know they've acquired an IT consulting firm at some point. 2 years down the road, there were exactly 2 people left from 200 because they got rejected by the culture. So I think there is, at the cultural level, there is a lot of change that needs to happen. And also in terms of solution-based selling. So anyway, these are just a few areas, of course. If they don't change that, I don't see how these big consulting firms are going to suddenly become good product managers.
Absolutely. I think there is some echo. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Yeah, so this is what the question alluded to as well. That is, have you seen success in professional services firms hiring from the market? So there are a few questions as well, and I know I'm very conscious of time. There used to be this phrase in our B school, right? Drinking from the fire hose. That's what is happening here a little bit. How much can you extract from 3 accomplished professionals on this on this 1-hour session? But very quickly, when it comes to insights, supporting business development, supporting partners in the field, any key takeaways that you'd like to share with our attendees? And for all our attendees, we will share a summary of this discussion with you. And if you have any questions, please do reach out to ps@evaluserve.com. But any parting thoughts in 3 minutes, so maybe 1 minute each. Sebastian, we can start with you.
I think it is a worthwhile exercise in professional service firms to get to much better grasp with internal data. So the data of the firm itself, just as well as their client data and the ecosystem data. I hope it goes away again. Okay. That is one. Another one is the human wrapper that we spoke about as well, around that data and around gathering insights from this data. I think with the current state of technologies and technology adoption in professional service firms, it's very important to use a careful approach in how you deploy that and take that step by step. So these are the 2 recommendations I would leave with.
Thank you, Sebastian. Ursh, as a practice.
I think some of this change is going to be forced by the market. I'll give you one example of a firm that could potentially be a disruptor. Take a firm like, and I don't know them really well, but I know of them, Globality. That's AI-driven models to procure services now, or for procurement. And they started with professional services, right? Now, guess what that does, and in terms of who you think your traditional competitors are. Another example, take EDD, electronic data discovery in law firms. Great example. You're going to have a class action suite. You're going to have hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of documents, and a machine's going to read it and tell the lawyers that this is the document that you should read because this seems like important. We're seeing now real examples of machine being applied to that. So whichever words you use, phrases you use, you can bring those documents together. You can string them together and make far more meaningful analysis. What does that mean for the law firm? It is a game changer. So I think both the technology sort of by itself, but I think also the adoption of that technology by competitors on the fringes will cause this change. It's bound to happen.
Oh, absolutely. Disruption and cross-sector convergence, that has been a big focus of our research as well, Ursh, so couldn't agree more. Mark, any final thoughts before we close?
Yeah, 2 thoughts. One on the content and then second on process going forward. So first thought, I think the professional services firm should not underestimate the pent-up demand in the marketplace for change of the professional services industry. When I look through these interviews that we conducted during this summer, you've been part of this project, and Sangeeta. So we've listened to the clients, and I mean, this is urgent stuff. This is not something we can wait for and then say, okay, yeah, maybe in 10 years from now, the partnership committees will have decided on some little cultural changes in the partners' compensation, right? I mean, that's the current speed. But I think this will have to change more quickly, because otherwise somebody is going to do it and then incumbents are going to look pretty bad. So I would sort of try to instill a little bit a sense of urgency here for the professional services firms. That's maybe the sort of, one point, because I think we're also out of time. The second point, Pratyush, just as a proposal, if we can, in the audience, collect some questions, we haven't been able to address, maybe we could jointly then create a little Q&A or FAQ or whatever out of this, and then send it back to the participants, just as a proposal.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Mark. So as I said, ps@evaluserve.com, or you just respond to the invite for this event. So thank you very much to our panelists and all our attendees. I hope you took away some key insights, and we'll be in touch. And anyways, we'll be sharing a summary of this discussion with all of you.